Hello, everyone. Welcome to the November Alive Academy. I'm so pleased you all could join us today for this webinar focusing on hidden biases in volunteer management with Susan Sano presenting. Alive is very pleased to host this session, and it's going to be about 60 minutes long. If you can't stay past the whole hour and you're a member, you can log in to Alive's website and catch the replay later, but we hope you'll stay for the entire duration. So a brief overview of our agenda for today. We are going to handle some housekeeping notifications quickly. Then we'll do introduction of our speaker, of course. And we're all here for the presentation, so we'll have time for questions and discussions. Gretchen and I will be monitoring the chat. So please feel free to put your questions in there and we'll get to them throughout. We'll pepper in some with Susan, and then the rest we'll get to afterwards. So let's move right on in to housekeeping. If you're having trouble with audio visual today, you've got a few options. You can keep us streaming in video on your computer and call in from your phone with audio only. If you're having trouble with your bandwidth, sometimes calling in by phone is just the best route to take. Any other support questions you might have, you can go ahead and put that in the chat box to the presenters only. So there's an option there where it says to. You can click on where it says everyone or to host and panelists, and that way we can help you from there. Speaking of the chat box, as I mentioned earlier, if you want to talk to all attendees, which we really encourage, make sure you choose that function. Otherwise, you're just sending the messages to Gretchen and I, which we of course appreciate as well, but we want to make this collaborative. So we certainly encourage you to share your experience and share with one another, and we'll monitor along the way. So a few announcements. We just wanted to kick things off with getting these done at the beginning. Voting is still open for the 2024 to 27 board members. Our annual meeting via Zoom is on December 6th. If you haven't registered already for that, make sure to hit up the website and register for that. And then our next month Alive Academy will be Success Stories from the Field presented by Kayla Paulson, CVA. So be on the lookout for that. If you haven't registered, that will be an awesome session as well. And that's through Kayla, who oversees our service enterprise, which as a service enterprise organization myself, I cannot highly recommend enough. And then last but not least, our newsletter will be coming out this weekend with a ton of fun stuff. So be on the lookout for that. All right, so let's move right into why we're all here today and do an introduction of Susan. I could not be more pleased to introduce her. Susan Sano is the Senior Manager, Volunteer Management Education at Volunteer Fairfax in Fairfax, Virginia. She leads the volunteer management educational programming, including webinars, roundtables, book clubs, and the area's Civic Circle cohort. Susan is an experienced meeting facilitator and trainer in nonprofit management and volunteer management. She has presented educational programs in the local area, statewide conferences, and at national meetings. Susan holds a BS in Consumer Community Services from Michigan State University. She became a certified volunteer administrator in 2020 and joined the board of Northern Virginia Association of Volunteer Administrators in 2021. In 2022, Susan was named an exemplary leader in volunteer engagement by the Association of Leaders in Volunteer Engagement through Alive. Congratulations, Susan. So at this point, I will now turn it over to Susan and we'll get started with the presentation.
Great, thank you so much. And the award was won a year ago. Still can't believe it that came true. And I find it was one of a great moment in my entire career. So I always appreciate that. Let me can you see my screen? Okay, so we have about 55 minutes, so let's go. So thanks for asking me to present, and I'm happy to be here. When we're talking about hidden biases and volunteer engagement, this is my scariest topic. I feel like I am the most vulnerable and raw when I am presenting this as a white woman. I am going to places that's not always super comfortable for everyone, but I like to start by identifying where my privilege is, where I can walk in a room and be seen, be accepted, be engaged. So I am a mom. I am a U.S. citizen. I am a college graduate. I am a homeowner, a voter, voted yesterday, and I'm an ENFJ in Myers-Briggs. So you can deduct what kind of person I am from that. And it's some of the privileges. There are other things I can mention, but I don't feel that they are particularly privileged information. But it's a really good place to self-reflect when you're talking about hidden biases, because this is what that journey is all about. So we're going to talk about hidden biases today, where we are looking at this issue with the lens of volunteer management. We are not going to solve issues of racism bias in an hour, but this is supposed to be the aha moment of, I got some work to do, or I have some reading to do. I have some conversations I need to have. Where is it going to lead to you next? It's really a time for reflection and learning. And this is one of those safe, brave spaces where you can ask questions, but also be respectful of others. I request that you stay on camera, because I think if we hide behind things, that's part of privilege and bias. So stay on camera. However, if something is said that triggers a difficult memory, a challenging time, please feel free to go off camera, to step back. And we may say something unintentionally that can offend you, or somebody else may ask something that unintentionally offends. We may call you out on this, but this isn't to shut you up. It's to educate you to realize, we really have to watch so many things when we're talking about hidden biases. So I'd like to reflect on where I started all this. And, here's just some of the things that I've heard and that made me a better volunteer manager. And as we talk about these things, and you may say, I don't get it, we will talk about it in the next hour about what this all means. I worked with a major funder whose mission in life right now is racism in our community. A couple decades ago, they were holding a meeting mandatory for all grantees on Easter Monday. I personally have approved the date of our annual volunteer awards breakfast that occurs in April, and we serve breakfast and food, and I've approved it. And it was the Jewish holiday of Passover. I approved it twice, almost 3 times. I've served on a board and was asked to find my own replacement. I worked with an executive director. A colleague said, let's go back to the big house and we can talk about it there. Or he said, let's powwow about that next week. I've attended a funder networking event. Funders got name tags. Everyone else got none. And then here in the Washington, D.C. area, we've struggled for a long time. And many years ago, Washington Redskins, that name doesn't bother me. So think about, in your life, in your world, personally, professionally, as a volunteer manager, think about some of the things that you've heard that, you'll hear some more about, and you'll realize, oh my goodness, that's just a terrible thing to say if you want to be welcoming, open, and less biased. So, you look at the nonprofit sector, and so much of bias and racism is really all wrapped up in power and wealth. So think about who holds the power in the nonprofit sector. It could be your executive director. He or she may also be answering to a board of directors, or maybe somebody will say, I will give you money, but, and there'll be strings attached. So they don't want you to say something out loud if they pay you, if their donation is big enough. Volunteers are also donors, so they may shift the way that you deal with volunteers because you don't want them to take their money elsewhere. Think about the power and wealth between paid staff and unpaid volunteers, and sometimes you run into areas for conflict. And then there's people who try to give outdated statements about, you keep quiet and you can keep your nonprofit status, or if you say something, we can pull your nonprofit status. These are old rules, but sometimes people like to hang on to them to keep us quiet on things that we know. So think about within your own organization, Who's influencing your organization's agendas, priorities, conversations, ability to change things to keep you quiet and not speak out. I believe volunteering is a path to battle bias and racism because we're the ones who choose the day of service, who offer the volunteer opportunities. We are building empathetic ways to serve the community. We're sometimes pushing people way outside of their usual comfort zones. If they live in one community and the day of service is someplace else at the wrong side of town, but you're going to go there and you're going to see that there's people there working in our community, making things better. We are the ones who are providing opportunities by putting a name, face, and true story. You can talk about the homeless, or you can meet people who have been homeless, who are in recovery, who are looking to get into transitional housing, to get back on their feet. And instead of saying, generally, you will know this is the story of Harriet, and this is how she got here. We are oftentimes breaking down the barriers from have-nots to welcoming in the community. We're building knowledge about issues. You can talk about hunger, but to see people who are hungry is a huge leap to understand our roles as advocates. And, we're offering new crowds, new generations to serve different people. They may have had experience in high school, in college, but now they're new professionals and have a different kind of investment in their community. We're offering to put that kind of things together. But as volunteer managers, we have responsibility. This quote from Sue Carter Call: volunteerism can reinforce patterns of power and privilege if we are not thoughtful about its design. So we have those powers. We can look at how we define opportunities, create transformative recipient-centric opportunities, very different than a corporate point of view, corporate-centric. We just want to come in, get a few pictures taken. Well, I'll be wearing t-shirts, it'll be fabulous, and we'll go after an hour and we'll tell them that they're solving hunger. And it's like, oh, we're going to do more than that as volunteer managers. We can present problem-solving examples, actions they can do, and we're sometimes bringing people to the front line. It's one thing to talk about people who are hungry. It's one thing to talk about climate change in our community, but if we show people, we are providing those actions to really make a difference. As leaders of volunteers, we are empathetic, curious, and if we push the right direction, we're also quite brave. So there's a couple books that I actually read. Gosh, it's been 3 years now. I wish I could tell you I'm reading about this all the time, but I am thinking about it, but I was really influenced with these two books. Blind Spot, The Hidden Biases of Good People, and then Subtle Acts of Exclusion. If you are looking to read more about it, there are bloggers and just people writing about it, and consultants and people taking action. I can tell you in 2020, after the murder of George Floyd, that was the question I asked, is what can volunteer managers do about racism? And I had no answer. I had no idea. But as I started reading and talking to people and networking, I think there is a strong list of people, and even the Minnesota Alliance for Volunteer Advancement has done incredible work. They've been doing research since 2015. So I always like to highlight them and say they are so ahead of the curve. We're all catching up, but they really led the way. But this one book in particular, in Blind Spot, the subtitle is Hidden Biases of Good People. And that really spoke to me, saying, yeah, as volunteer managers, we want to say that we are always the good people. But this is my question to you is, or my statement to you is, we may not always be the good people, but what can we do to educate ourselves, change, and no longer support these conscious and unconscious biases? So what is bias? It's holding negative associations. consciously, you say something out loud. Unconsciously, you don't even realize that you're always calling on one person before another, because they're the ones who look just like you. We sometimes undercut consciousness or conscious commitments to inclusion and fairness, and that we collectively organize institutionalized practices. I've heard volunteerism is one of the great bastions of white supremacy. And when you think about it, it's like, yeah, it can if we present it in one way. But again, as volunteer managers, we have some power in our choices, and that's what we'll talk about today. So when we're battling bias, oftentimes in bias and racism, they talk about the I, the we, the us. So the question is, what can I do? What can I do as a human being? What can I do as an individual? What can I do as a volunteer manager? And that's what we'll talk about today. What can we do? What can my volunteer program or organization do as a whole, as a larger influencer in our community? And then what can all of us do? What can a community do to battle bias and racism? So it's the I, the we, and the us. So the other book that I showed you before, we talk about the subtle acts of exclusion. They're also called microaggressions. Subtle, soft. We're not blatantly saying things. The acts are what we're saying or doing, and how we're excluding people ever so subtly, but it makes the difference, and it reinforces these systems of power, inequity, and bias. So a subtle act of exclusion, we're telling people you're invisible. People who are like you are invisible. You don't belong here. You're a curiosity and you're a threat or burden. So what can a subtle act of exclusion really sound like? And it becomes a statement about bias. When you ask somebody, when you're working together, perhaps on a day of service, you really are so articulate, which means I thought you were going to be stupid and not be able to string together a full sentence. So, who are you saying this to? I've heard this so many times and it pains me is, hey, I know you're here, but you obviously must be an illegal alien. So where are you really from? Where are your people from? That means you are not part of the community that we're at now. So trying to push them back and say different. Showing a strange connection. Hey, you're from Jamaica. I love Bob Marley. Is that really saying that you understand their community, where they've come from, their journey to this point in time? No, it's just, I think, saying something pretty shallow. Sometimes we can try to be funny. Can we get el mucho discounto? And then you can even hear yourself trying to entertain yourself. Can you say something to me in, Chinese, Catholic, Jewish, whatever kind of word you want to use. So even with the best intentions, we can really sound very biased and not very welcoming. So think about some of the things that we say all the time, and who are we really excluding? This app can be found on any iPhone. So we are assuming everybody has an iPhone, right? Not necessarily. And if you say, you can plug into the program we have because everybody's got an iPhone. Handicapped people don't use our services. Okay, you're assuming if handicapped people had access, maybe they would use your services, but you're just pushing a whole group of people away. We can be reached by anyone via the subway. I've actually heard that here in the DC area, and there are people in, let's say, Ward 8, and if you know the DC area, that's the poorest of all the wards. Some people have never been on the subway. They don't know where it is, and we're assuming that that's a type of vehicle to get around the community. I read this one on Facebook. We have a lovely bride's garden as a setting for our wedding photos. You're excluding people if you perhaps are two grooms and no brides. And my favorite that I really have heard is we want our corporate volunteering program to be no less than 10 miles from our office. Let's focus on serving the homeless in, and I use the term Great Falls, Virginia. Fill in the blank for any very wealthy community in your area. Great Falls, Virginia, I looked it up, the median household income is $234,000. That's not where you're going to find many homeless people. So the corporation was giving their priorities over the true priorities of the community. So if you want to introduce some of these ideas to your staff, to your colleagues, to your even your fellow volunteers, there's a program that's called Project Implicit. And it's to recognize your own biases, where your own blind spots might be, and may help you as you are getting people to understand how bias and racism occurs in a community. It's not, again, going to identify it for everybody. It opens the conversation. So you can have people take some make some exercises to find out what it says about their level of bias. This is research. You're participating in research. They collect data on a regular basis. You're not going to use these tests for any safeguards. You're not going to say, oh, then you're not biased, so you can work with this group of people. It just gives you a guidance to open up the conversation. People may or may not like the results, and there is the potential use for misuse. So you're not going to use these for any diagnosis, any diagnostic purposes. And sometimes you can learn to outthink the test. And if you take it lots, it may be not as effective, but it's a really good way to think about things. I'm going to take a pause for a moment and ask if there's any questions. I see there's nine chats statements.
Yes, so there's a few things, comments so far that I just wanted to share with the group that I felt were worthy. So Casey says, working in the domestic violence, sexual assault, and stalking nonprofit field, the power and control wheel is constantly rotating in the back of my mind and is applicable across the board. Being mindful of who has power and what type is so important to contributing to breaking the ultimate cycle. Thank you for talking about that. My organization has definitely said no to donors with certain strings that were wildly inappropriate.
Thank you, Casey. Excellent. Yeah, I mean, some of these things, not just fighting bias and racism, but yes, we have lots of things going on in the work that we do. So we're gonna, oh, did you have another one, Sarah?
I just wanted to mention, Deirdre mentioned a grant that offers a 4-week course helping explore these issues, and she put it in the chat if anyone's interested in that.
That sounds good. Excellent. People are doing work in this area. I can tell you there's some discussion about the ebb and flow of how hot the DEI issue was 3 years ago and how it's beginning to cool off. And people who, or organizations or companies, corporations who hired people to work in the DEI and all the letters that have been added to that sentence. Some of them have either gotten rid of the person or put them in HR. There is an ebb and flow. And I just want to say that as volunteer managers, when we can make these choices to keep our work going, but we'll talk about that some more. So when we'll talk about finding and fighting bias in the volunteer management cycle. The volunteer management cycle is something that we talk about a lot at Volunteer Fairfax, starting with the top with planning, recruitment and selection, orientation and training, supervision, recognition, evaluation, and then we start all over again. And you can actually find examples at every single step. So, this is what it's about, is saying, oh my goodness, we've been doing this. Let's think of a better way to be more inclusive, welcoming, and we're going to break the cycle. So when we're talking about planning, recognize the similarities or differences between the mission, the people you serve, versus the volunteer base? Is everybody white working with people who are African American or persons of color? You have some special challenges there. Are you addressing immediate needs, which are important, but not acknowledging the systemic causes? There's a group in DC, homeless shelter, a feeding actually, they're just a breakfast program, but they realized that they could feed people, but they also need to become more active in advocacy, as well as offering other services to the people who learn to trust them for breakfast, but have them stay several hours to give them a safe space. Are you ready to measure? One of the things that we have found that you can say, I'm sorry, we're colorblind. We don't even see color. That's missing the point. We see color, we acknowledge color, and we realize that some people are being heard on a regular basis. So we need to commit to counting. And what actions can prove or embrace your inclusiveness? Are you all talk, or are you actually making a difference? In recruitment and selection, why don't people volunteer? The most common response is, I was never asked. So you need to think about, who are you asking to volunteer? Is it the same person, same kind of person, from the same community, from the same corporation, from the same neighborhood, from the same church every time? Or are you being diverse in who you're even asking? Remember that there are financial barriers for some that will keep them from volunteering. It can be something as simple or complex, depending on your community. Transportation, parking available. Do you require people to have particular uniforms, whether it's a white shirt and black pants, or the t-shirt from the organization? Do you offer food? Do you require food to be brought in? Do you not allow food to be brought in? Well, that may not work for somebody who needs to eat on a regular basis. The timing of your volunteering opportunities can lead to selection with bias. If you are always offering your volunteer trainings or volunteer projects on a Saturday morning or a Sunday morning, that's completely two different kinds of people. You need to make sure that you are offering a wide variety of opportunities. Tuesday night, a Saturday morning, that kind of thing. Your geography. Where are your volunteers versus where do they need to go to volunteer? Is it close by? Is it the neighborhood? Is it around the corner? Is it a subway ride? Is it a 20-minute drive? Is it an hour and a half drive? What does the geography do, and how does that affect your volunteers? What will you do during the winter if people can't get around versus a place that's accessible where you have no snow? Looking if you have team captains, looking at who they are. If it's not diverse, ask why. You need to think about who you're selecting, and maybe have some more diversity in those leadership opportunities. Is there a cycle of sameness in your volunteer opportunities? Are you always asking for somebody who will fill out forms for you in English? And maybe you need to offer some other things where English isn't as essential, and would welcome people who speak other languages, whether in Northern Virginia, we have Spanish, we have Korean, we have Urdu. There's lots of different things going on, but if you're always offering the same thing in the same language, maybe you are keeping people away. Are you using inclusive language in your documents and applications? I was filling out a form verbally the other day, and they said, I need to ask, I'm sorry, I need to ask, male, female, other, don't wish to answer. She felt very uncomfortable and I'm saying, thank you for asking. I'll pick female, but I appreciate that you are sensitive to being inclusive. Are you requiring background checks? I cannot stress this enough. If you need to have required background checks, never sway, never change. If they are working with vulnerable populations, children, under 18, seniors, people who no longer can speak because of health issues, they need to have background checks. However, if they're going to be out pulling invasive weeds, helping with your spreadsheet, maybe a background check is not required. I also throw out the caveat if they enter working with your organization without the background check, but are moving to an area that does give them more access to individuals, they still have to go back and do a background check. So be very sensitive to that. And think about if the volunteer opportunity has anything to do with the mission, or have you gone so far out of bounds, you're forgetting that they're not there to support the mission of your organization. There is a very subtle bias in volunteer recruitment. We generally talk about skin color and gender, but think about other ways that we can keep or push away people, whether it's a differing height and weight, introverts versus extroverts. Maybe you're asking for a particular marital status, or if they're required to be parents, why? What kind of abilities or disabilities do they bring? If they're going to use a wheelchair, can you make the correct accommodations? And then there's the invisible disabilities, such as people with autism. You may not know that, and you may be making assumptions, and maybe they will then say that they can't do something based on their disability. Sometimes you're looking for people who sound just like yourself, or I need somebody with a good Spanish accent, but I can still understand. And I love working with alumni associations, but what happens if everyone went to the same college? What kind of limited people group that you'd be working with? It may do some self-selection. So thinking about orientation and training, think about what we learned during the pandemic and what's the access rate and the success rate of having a virtual training, which became so much more popular during the pandemic, or the in-person. Maybe you should, if you're still offering both, which is going to be more successful, or realize that at a virtual, you're going to have 30 people and get 10 new volunteers, but in person, you can have 20 new people and get 10 volunteers. Are there non-technological alternatives to access info? Every time somebody said, go to SharePoint, and it's like, I'll try. I don't know if I'm going to be able to do that. Or would you just be sending it to people as a way to equalize access? Or are you going to make copies and drop it in the mail because somebody wants it on paper? We've talked about this already, but again, your selection of days and times in which you're going to offer the orientation and training. If you're going to do your trainings every Wednesday night at 7 p.m., you probably won't be getting many parents with families with young kids, because that's usually a very important time for them to be there and be a part of their family. Looking for that inclusive language, check for that. You may have fixed it in the planning documents and the initial recruitment and selection, but also in the orientation and training. If you are targeting or want to increase the number of non-native English speakers, making sure that the information is appropriate. And if you've set any diversity goals, this will help you, but you also have to support that throughout the whole process, from the recruitment all the way to the evaluation. Considering alternative formats, large type, sign language interpretation, and you can ask some questions about bias in your annual evaluation of your, not annual evaluation of your training session. When we supervise volunteers, bias can really come into play. There's an imbalance of power. You are the person in charge and they're doing things for you, or it could be flipped. They're the volunteer, they get to call what they will and will not do, and you just have to agree with them. That may work, that may not, but it can be a point of bias coming forward and coming into focus. Looking at your volunteer skills as opposed to who they are, what kind of skills do they bring? Can those kinds of diversity goals guide you to identify future stars? If you are meeting somebody who's a potential um, uh, uh, tax, do your taxes every year, they may say, I am a CPA. That's perfect. We want CPAs who can do people's taxes, but I also speak these 3 languages. That's a real winner, and that can be somebody who's a true future star. Thinking about staff volunteer trainings, making sure that they're understanding where their biases and their subtle acts of exclusion, what they can be doing, and what that means to your organization and your volunteer program. And when you recognize your volunteers, are you consistently rewarding the same type of volunteer? We learned this during the pandemic, that people who were getting the number of hours served in a certain year, well, that's a person who has this enormous amount of time, but you're not asking for, about impact, or doing something extraordinary, an act of bravery. It's not about how many hours you did this. So look at what you've been rewarding and see if it needs to be adjusted. Collecting measurable data is part of the recognition. Well, it's not about how many hours, but you can say, wow, this team of 25 volunteers gave 4,000 hours this past year. That's amazing. But look at that process. And what are you giving to thank volunteers? I just read the other day, somebody's looking at that Christmas ornament. And that's really fine for everybody who celebrates Christmas. But if you have diversified your volunteer base, and it's a wide variety of people from different places around the world, maybe a Christmas ornament is not the way to go. So think about that and how you can be more welcoming and inclusive. When you are evaluating your program, allow for that self-reflection, your self-reflection, as well as your volunteer self-reflection, host self-reflection, committing to data collection. And if you've set diversity goals, see how you can meet them, get close to them, and tell people what you're doing to diversify your volunteer base. If you do an annual survey, which I really recommend that you do for your volunteers, ask them about if they're seeing bias. Tell me, am I missing something? And you can tell me as a safe space without retribution. And when you have data, collect the data, share it, whether it's with other volunteers, with your boss, with your board of directors. Let them know your commitment to ending racism and bias, and this is the progress that we are making. So before I start talking about some specific examples, Sarah, are there any other questions?
Yes, we had a great question come in, and it says, any suggestions on how to point out to coworkers phrases or choices that create exclusion when the group may not be applicable? For example, I had a coworker use the phrase powwow, and I pointed out the problem, and she responded, I didn't know you're Native. I'm not Native, just trying to educate.
Yes, and we will talk about that. And I can tell you that exact word was used. I had to stop and educate my executive director at that point, different person, not the one now, and let them realize that it's just not appropriate. Well, we will talk about that. It's absolutely an action that we are responsible. And this is the journey that I've been on, that I'm welcoming others to say, you know what, I'm going to say these things out loud. And let me tell you, and I mean, I'll tell you again in a little bit, it's not always easy. It's sometimes troublesome. And I was actually fired for saying some things to my boss. I was then rehired about an hour later, but it was a little bit painful because I've chosen to take this journey and realize that it takes work, but we'll talk about it a little bit more. Many of us host a corporate day of service. So I wanted to clue you in how we could make this a stronger experience for ourselves, our organization, as well as the corporation and the people who are volunteering that day. Sometimes I think we're sending the wrong message that, solve hunger. We're going to cure this problem today, but let this be about joining together, but also learning about the issue. If you are having a group come in to put together 1,000 power packs or 1,000 bags of food for during the holidays, you can say, you know, pack these 100 or 1,000 bags, or we can pack the 1,000 bags and also learn about the needs of our community and how many people we're serving today versus how many more people are who are hungry, and why this is not just a problem through the holidays. This is a problem 365 days a year. Think about whose agenda is being addressed. Very common with corporate people. And think about whether it's the nonprofit being served, the corporation, or the people who actually need the service and support. Remember my example is we want to serve the homeless in Great Falls, Virginia, and it's like they're missing it entirely. Don't talk about saving the world, that we're going to change everything by this day of service. Thank them for their service today, but also offer long-term solutions. We do these packing problems once a month. Every Saturday, bring your colleagues, bring your neighbors, bring your family, and we can work on this together. Think about the volunteers who are coming in. Are they acting like they're part of the community, or just, you know, checking a box? I know everybody wears the t-shirts. I like the t-shirts, but sometimes I do roll my eyes that just look at me, I'm doing good. Take a picture. I actually took the picture of on the screen. It's one of my favorites, but what are we saying? What are we telling people? That, you know, we are so grateful that you are here today to be a part of this community. Here's what other things that we have ahead. As volunteer managers, are we making good supporting choices? Meaning, if you want to have impact on the community, but you're bringing food and supplies from places way outside this community, you're not fulfilling the true vision. So, you know, if you're bringing a group to a nonprofit, ask them who's their neighbors who cater your lunches. That's who we would like to pick up food from. So it's helping through everybody in the community. And I'm a big advocate for including reflection, getting your volunteers to see the context of their day of service and what this really means and what it means to them, what it means to them going forward in future volunteer experiences. Event volunteers. If you have an annual gala, if you have a packing day, if, you know, whatever kind of event it is, there very easily can have some bias. Again, think about it as not only doing this action, but learning, not just volunteering. Do not say that we're going to change the world in a day. These are short-term projects with long-term impacts, but the long-term impact looks very different. And are you talking about systemic causes? If you're having an annual gala, there are some really serious obstacles. Maybe somebody can't work for 2 days straight to get the room ready, or come in once a week for 3 months to have meetings that could have been held on Zoom, but you have asked them to come to a same site. What's the location, accessibility of that site, the host site of a gala? There's a lot of hidden costs. You know, the easy one are, you know, right, transportation, parking. Do they need a babysitter? But if you say to them, if this is a black tie event and they're volunteers and maybe they're committed to the issue, but they don't have money to go get a black tie appropriate dress. I know a nonprofit who would actually budget for a certain number of volunteers and staff members to give them money towards getting an appropriate dress. And just an idea, think about when you give priority to long-term volunteers, you're really supporting some systemic inequity and bias. Change that dynamic. Think about saving spots for some newer volunteers, younger, more volunteers, and be a better reflection of your community. So we talked a little bit before, some actions to be a better human. Identify and name bias directly. The person who said, yep, she would point that out and realize but nobody here is being affected. Well, understand that seeing this bias and seeing the privilege or seeing these things going on, you can speak out, and that's part of our own privilege, your own privilege, my own privilege. Um, Remaining silent or neutral is a form of bias. So you're going to speak out whether or not the person is in the room. Don't ask a person of color about explaining to me why this could be a biased remark. They're experts of their own experiences, and you're taking this journey to say, okay, now I see it. Right. We are not calling the Washington football team the Redskins anymore. It didn't affect me, but it's not about what I was thinking. There were others. It's your journey to self-educate and again, speak up whether or not the person is in the room or objects. You can say it, and it's part of our difficult work. So I just wanted to go through 12 actions to be a better leader of volunteers. You can call it out, point it out, be the voice to your organization's power broker saying we shouldn't be doing this way anymore. You can include some bias sensitivity training to your volunteer training or a staff meeting using that project implicit as a way to start the conversation. Stay calendar aware to selecting dates. If you are trying to pick the date for your gala, ask others who are not like you from other communities, other religions, just others who can say, oh yeah, that date is good or that date's not going to work at all. Double check your communications efforts, making sure that you are reflecting inclusiveness to your diversity of the people you serve. Verifying name pronunciations, always awkward until you say, you know what, not awkward. I say to people, I am trying to welcome you and welcome you properly. Did I mess up your name? And, I've gotten laughter, I've gotten thank yous, but I also am learning and listening and realizing you're so much more welcome if you know how to pronounce the name, and you're going to pronounce it the way they want it. They're not going to come in and give you a long name and say, well, that's fine, but I'll call you Sam because that's easier for me. That's really offensive. Name tags. Everybody gets one. Everybody wears one. I'll never forget going to the event with all these funders. They had names. I had nothing. Think about budgeting for paid internships. Internships are one of the great examples of white supremacy and economic supremacy. Maybe your family, everybody needs to work during the summer. Well, having a paid internship gives a huge leg up as you search for that first job from high school or from college. And paid internships is a particular economic strata, and you're trying to offer opportunities for all. White House fellowships used to be free. White House internships used to be a free place, and now they have changed and are paying for them. Still competitive, but at least now they pay. Asking others about volunteering in their own culture or their home country is always an interesting conversation. What words do they use? They may not have a word for volunteering, but they will certainly have one for helping out, helping their neighbors, helping their elders. So it's a really interesting opportunity to make sure that what we're all talking about is the same worldwide. We just may call it different things. You can train volunteers to become active listeners, to intervene if they're seeing something that you don't want to be happening at your event or day of service. Use some bias related questions in your reflection wrap up. My favorite is the group of volunteers today from your corporation. Did they look like the people we serve? And how did that make you feel? And especially for those who were similar. And did it make them feel awkward or better or impactful? It's a really interesting question so people start thinking about their biases. When hiring staff, open new avenues to see job candidates. If you're always going to the Idealist or the Washington Post, but maybe you should look at community newspapers or newspapers from a particular ethnic group that you're looking to get more volunteers from, the Chamber of Commerce, from the Asian community, as an example. Yes, please post salary, no to salary history. It's a practice that's being advocated for. I love posting salary so people know what they're walking into, because it can go both ways. Let's say you're going to pay $50,000 a year, but somebody who is making $125,000 but figures, hey, I'll just throw it out there and I know they'll pay me $125,000. What a waste of my time as the hiring agent. And then think about doing resume reviews and omit the names. It's amazing how we can be biased by the name that we see at the top of the paper. And finally, so that's 12. I found a 13th recently from Jane Cravens. She said, if you're posting about digital divide, equity, and inclusion, but you you're tweeting images that don't have an alternate text, your YouTube videos don't have correct closed captions, your podcast doesn't have a transcript, I really can't take your commitment seriously. So in the next 10 minutes, we're going to put it all together with some scenarios, and feel free to comment in the chat area. I don't think you can go on microphone so we can hear. So put it in the chat and Sarah and I will watch for your reaction. So scenario number 1, gala volunteers. Do they really reflect us today? So the annual gala is set for January. It's now November. Time for the highly anticipated, very competitive volunteer sign up. Registration is always based on seniority because they've earned it, right? 90% of our 25-year plus volunteers are male, over 70, and white. We do have a new professionals and action team that are a mix of male and female volunteers, all under the age of 30. They better represent the community we serve racially and geographically. Too bad there are never any choice slots when it's their turn to register. So my question to you is, how do we balance between motivated new volunteers and volunteers who have earned their place in line and their honor through their many years of service?
There are so many things in this right off the bat that just scream to me.
That's the idea.
If anyone has any thoughts on this, go ahead and put them in the chat. I've got that open so I can read them out to Susan.
I just read the comment from Elizabeth saying about the Christmas ornaments. She doesn't get a tree because of her cat. So I love that point as well. I have gotten Christmas ornaments as gifts. What a mess. So Arlette said she'd get a group together with both groups. Yes, do, line some mentoring is always a possibility. You also would need to make sure that your most senior volunteers are on board with this new program, because they may fight it. They may be kind of jerks about it, because I've done this for 30 years and I've done it, and it's like, okay,
this is the way it's always been done.
This is the way it's always been done. And so you have to work with them to retrain them and let them know, okay, we really need to, half of the spots are going to be set aside for our young professionals, our new professionals and action team. Do a random lottery is a great idea. So there are ways to break the mold, break the patterns that we've had, and be more welcoming and open. I have gotten grief from people who said, but they've earned their weight in line, and other people who just want to bust it up. We don't allow seniority at all. And I just keep thinking there's got to be a way where we can all be on the same page. So let's look at my board members with a big idea. Ruh-roh. So a couple of board members came to our October board meeting, said, oh, let's be like that museum in Chicago. They just fired all of their volunteers and started all over again to make that volunteer team right. The executive director, she said she's considering the idea. She said, board members include some very powerful, very influential, generous members of the community, but some of our volunteers are high dollar donors too. So as volunteer managers, how would you respond to your boss, your CEO, your volunteer corps, the development director, and your own conscience to the impacts of these decisions, to say, let's just fire all the volunteers and start all over again? This is in the name of diversity. Thinking about what other options you can embrace.
The first comment that came in said, this hits home as someone based in Chicago.
It is the Chicago Museum of Art. And they did this, it was like 2020, maybe 2021. I read about it and my jaw dropped. And it's like, I want to see, I don't even know whatever happened. I should look into it. But it's these, I think part of this is the board members with big ideas without thinking it through. How does this really work? How do you let them know that it solves and starts problems?
We had one feedback coming from Casey saying, talk to the executive director first. This is when you bring in your annual impact report and data over the years, offer other alternatives for volunteers, tactful reality checks.
Here. Yeah, it's, like I said, big ideas from people not thinking this through. It's scary.
Bridget brings up a great point saying volunteers should also be involved in anything like that.
Especially if they're going to all be fired. So let's think about the impact of money and budgeting on diversity, equity, and inclusion. So, your organization has spent the past few years re-educating, rethinking. You are committed to the principles of DEI plus. You've heard the budget development process is now at the very beginning for the July 1, 2024 through June 30th, 2025 fiscal year. What new expenses should you include in your proposed budget to battle against bias commitments for your volunteer program? And how will you be sure these ideas and expenses are not cut by others, those without the volunteer connection?
I'll share briefly on that. We just started our fiscal year budgeting, and we actually included postage this time around for mail-in applications because we do them all online, and we have folks in our community that do not have computer access. And so we now budgeted in to mail them. If they call us and say they'd like an application, we now mail it with a return envelope and postage so that they can return back their application.
It's a huge leap.
Awesome. And it was, a trial and error of learning and listening to our public as to what they needed. So a lesson learned on our part. Deirdre said, Susan, you were able to read about the Chicago Art Institute because the displaced docents had friends on editorial boards. I just lost it.
Yeah, it was private.
In law firms. This was a really interesting case study.
Yeah. So I responded back to her and said, yes, I will look at it. It's fascinating. The other thing that I wanted to point out, so we talked about paying interns. So those are the kinds of things that you would have to budget for. And you're going to start throwing out that idea. You will get pushback, but if you there's a website called, I think it's Pay the Interns. You can get some really interesting data on why this is a continuing cycle of privilege and trying to be more inclusive and more welcoming to lots of people who might have interest in your organization, but don't have the means. And Casey points out sometimes grants can cover for paid internships. But how you will work to be sure these ideas are kept in. You're going to have to do some educating when you hand in your budget. I would give support data to let people know that this is why we're going out on this with this idea. So let me just go through some of these things that I said at the beginning and what I was really talking about. A major funder scheduled a mandatory all grantee meeting on Easter Monday. In the African American community, at least in the Washington metropolitan area, Easter Monday is somewhat of a holiday. It goes back to the time when many African American women where housekeepers, they had to serve their family, their employer on Easter Monday. On Easter Sunday. So Easter Monday, which would have been a traditional day off for them, was the day they would schedule for family gatherings. So a mandatory all grantee meeting, they had no idea how offensive it was for the African American community in the DC area, which is very strong. Approve the date of the holidays. You got to check your calendars and ask around and realize that you may be tripping onto other dates of things you did not even know exist. I'm not talking about made up holidays. I am talking about real holidays. When I was asked to serve on a board, but asked to find my own replacement, it's more likely that you would find somebody who looks like you, acts like you, similar. It's not the way to go to build diversity. You are certainly not being intentional. You're being lazy. The colleague that is using words that have very strong connections to very racist actions, call people out. Right, you do say, you can't use that anymore. You really can't. So I would say low man on the totem pole. I'm saying you're the low rung on the ladder. There are alternatives, but I'm determined to find those. Attended the funder networking event. Funders got name tags. Everyone did not. That means if you weren't a funder, you were not a human being. You didn't matter. We're not going to talk to you. You have no value. And that was from a real world example. And I'm still angry about it. And I know that I have to speak out and not accept when things I don't agree with. And no, I did not change the name of the team, but somebody else figured that out. And I'm a happier human because of that. So my final statement to tell you about this work, about fighting bias and racism, we'll stumble. This is messy work. It is difficult work. If you're not doing it right, you're not being critiqued and judged. And I told you, I've been fired. I have been closed out of meetings. I have been talked about. It's great. It's it's been a wild ride. I can say the wrong thing, and sometimes people say, I'm scared to say anything because I'm scared I'm going to say the wrong thing. I can still say I'm the low man on the totem pole and go, oh my goodness, I've got to stop saying that. I know that that's wrong because, so you're educating yourself, you're educating others. And ask yourself the question, what will it take to move from observer to ally? It's lifelong work. I'm still listening. I'm still stumbling. And happy to bring this message to others today and throughout the year. I love to close with my favorite Maya Angelou quote: do the best you can until you know better. And then when you know better, do better. That's my work. So thank you so much. Sarah, if there's any other questions, let me know.
Susan, this has just been outstanding, and I so appreciate you doing this presentation today on behalf of Alive, and I really appreciate your vulnerability through this, because as you mentioned, this is very messy and a very difficult subject to discuss. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Several comments in the chat, not necessarily questions, just saying thank you and how great your presentation was. I do want to remind everyone really quick, if you have any questions, just go ahead and put them in the chat. I know we're a teeny bit over here on time. As Gretchen mentioned earlier on, if you are an Alive member, the recording will be uploaded to the Alive site with the link. So be on the lookout for that. And I'm going to go ahead and really quickly just remind everyone, Susan, if you want to go ahead and exit out on the screen, and I'll share my screen really, really quickly. I know we're short on time, everyone. All right, so just a reminder that we have different types of memberships. If you would like to join Alive, please feel free to reach out to Gretchen at manager@volunteeralive.org. And I'll put her contact info right here for everyone. Thank you again to Susan. Thank you to everyone who participated in the chat, who asked great questions and gave feedback and shared their experiences. I think that this is such an important topic. And again, just a reminder, the recording and the slide deck will be posted on the public and the member side in a day or two. So with that, thank you to Susan. Have a fantastic rest of your afternoon, everyone. I appreciate you attending today's Alive Academy, and we will see you next month in December.
Thank you.